He wrapped her close as nebulas lit the night, their swirling colors painting the endless void in shades of violet, indigo, and gold that shimmered like living fire across the darkness of space. Commander Alaric's arms felt heavier than usual, not from fatigue or the weight of his armored suit, but from the tiny, trembling body he held. Lyra, the young Renari girl, was smaller than any human child he had ever known, her delicate frame nearly lost against the broad expanse of his chest. Yet within her fragile exterior, he sensed a strength he could not yet name, a spark that had survived the catastrophic destruction of her homeworld. Her wide, luminous eyes reflected both wonder and despair, twin forces that churned in her gaze, as if the universe itself had placed all its contradictions within her. Alaric had faced horrors no mortal should ever endure: collapsing wormholes that threatened to tear entire fleets apart, hostile alien civilizations whose minds moved in dimensions humans could barely perceive, and planetary bombardments that reduced entire cities to dust. But none of those experiences could have prepared him for this, cradling a survivor of cosmic tragedy, whose every heartbeat seemed to whisper of loss and resilience, vulnerability and unyielding courage all at once. He could feel the rapid rhythm of her pulse against his chest, a frantic, uneven drum that mirrored the chaos of the nebula outside. The wreckage of her shuttle floated silently nearby, shards of metallic plating drifting like fallen leaves across the star-strewn void. Some fragments glowed faintly, still powered by residual energy fields, casting fractured reflections across the cabin of Alaric's ship. Lyra's species had been masters of quantum perception, able to manipulate energy and communicate across vast distances with thought alone, yet now she clung to him as though he were the only tangible anchor in a universe that had turned against her. Alaric understood, perhaps for the first time, the profound vulnerability of those who carried the weight of entire worlds within themselves, now left alone in the cold, indifferent expanse. He spoke softly, his voice a rare gentleness that even he had rarely permitted himself. "You are safe. No one can harm you now." The words seemed to settle over her like a protective shroud, though her trembling did not immediately cease. He adjusted his hold, cradling her more securely, his body absorbing the tension she radiated. In that moment, the nebula outside seemed to pulse with him, its swirling light reflecting across the cabin like the heartbeat of some cosmic entity, observing, approving, and perhaps even guiding him. As hours passed, the two drifted through the nebula, navigating the tangled currents of ionized gas and hidden debris fields. Lyra gradually relaxed against him, her head resting on his shoulder, trusting for the first time in what felt like an eternity. She spoke in broken words at first, fragments of memory spilling out, the laughter of siblings, the towering spires of her city, the cold, searing light of the attack that had destroyed it all. Alaric listened intently, piecing together the story of a civilization that had endured millennia, now teetering on the edge of extinction. Each recollection was a brushstroke of brilliance and tragedy, and with every word he felt the immense weight of responsibility pressing down upon him. Not just to save her life, but to safeguard the legacy of a people now reduced to a single child. Alaric's hands tightened slightly around her, not in constraint, but in silent vow. He would protect her. He would carry the memory of her world within himself if necessary. In the vast emptiness of space, with nebulae flowing around them like rivers of light, he realized that the strongest battles were often fought not against enemies, but against despair, fear, and the crushing weight of helplessness. And in that understanding, a strange warmth settled in his chest, a reminder that even amidst destruction, hope could survive, and life, in its most delicate form, could endure. Outside, the nebula shifted and shimmered in waves, as if responding to the quiet bond forming within the ship. Light danced across the walls, casting fleeting shadows that moved with a life of their own. Alaric adjusted his hold again, whispering stories of courage and perseverance, teaching Lyra to breathe through fear, to find steadiness in chaos. Slowly, she mirrored his calm, the frantic pulse of her heart slowing, her body relaxing against him, as if recognizing that he was more than just a protector. He was a constant in the midst of cosmic uncertainty. As the light from the nebula swirled and enveloped them, Alaric looked down at her face, seeing reflected not just the terror of loss, but the flicker of possibility, the glimmer of life refusing to be extinguished. He knew that this night, these hours in the heart of a glowing nebula, would mark the beginning of something profound. It was more than survival. It was the first step in reclaiming a future, in nurturing a courage that could someday rival the universe itself. And so he held her tighter, feeling the fragile pulse of life against his chest, knowing that, in the midst of galaxies burning and civilizations falling, even one heart, protected and cherished, could shine with the force of 1,000 stars. The ship hummed softly, its engines a distant, steady heartbeat against the vast, silent expanse of space. Lyra had curled closer, her small hands gripping the fabric of Alaric's uniform, as though the bond itself could anchor her against the endless void. The nebula outside shifted with every passing moment, swirling clouds of violet, crimson, and gold, wrapping the ship in a kaleidoscope of light that seemed almost alive, as if the universe itself was observing them, testing them, perhaps even guiding them. Alaric's eyes remained fixed on her, not with the detachment of a commander issuing orders, but with the quiet intensity of a guardian bearing the weight of an entire civilization's hope. He let her tell him more about her people, about the intricate networks of crystal towers and cities that had floated like islands among the stars. The Renari had been a civilization of scholars and warriors, their technology intertwined with their ability to perceive energy in ways no human could comprehend. Alaric listened, piecing together stories that were as wondrous as they were heartbreaking. The festivals of light that had once stretched across entire planets, the rituals of memory and honor, the meticulous cultivation of knowledge preserved in crystal archives. Every detail she recounted added depth to the tragedy he now carried with him. This was not merely a survivor he had found. This was the last living testament to a species, a child who bore the collective memory of a fallen civilization in her small, fragile mind. Lyra's voice faltered at times, breaking under the weight of memory and grief. She spoke of the day the attackers had come, a wave of darkness that had swept over her home, shattering the crystal towers and scattering her people across the void. She had hidden in the corridors beneath the city's lowest levels, surviving on sheer instinct and the faint glow of bioluminescent plants that had once been part of her world's delicate ecosystem. Alaric felt his chest tighten as he listened. There had been thousands of children like her, yet she had survived, alone, against impossible odds. The determination in her voice, even as she trembled, hinted at an inner strength that belied her small frame. He began to speak to her of resilience, of courage, and of hope. "You are stronger than you realize," he whispered, his voice barely louder than the hum of the ship. "Every breath you take, every beat of your heart, is a rebellion against the darkness that tried to take you. You carry the legacy of your people, and I will help you honor it." Lyra's fingers tightened slightly against him, a silent acknowledgement, and he felt the fragile connection deepen, a bond forged in the shared silence of space, in the quiet understanding that they were no longer alone. The nebula outside shifted once more, forming luminous tendrils that stretched toward the ship as if reaching out to brush against it. Alaric couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this particular region of space than simple cosmic chance. He had navigated wormholes in radiation fields, battled rogue fleets, and stared into the heart of supernovae. Yet the sensation he felt now, a pulse of life and purpose, was different. It was as if the nebula itself was guiding him, urging him to protect this child, to lead her to something that transcended mere survival. And he intended to obey that silent call. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time had become meaningless in the midst of the nebula's brilliance. Alaric maintained a delicate balance, piloting the ship through shifting currents of plasma and debris while cradling Lyra, whispering stories of courage and resilience to keep her calm. He told her of human heroes, of past victories against impossible odds, of civilizations that had endured calamities far worse than what she had witnessed. She listened, her eyes reflecting the nebula's shifting colors, absorbing not just his words, but the unspoken promise that she was safe, that someone in this vast, indifferent universe cared enough to protect her. As they moved deeper into the nebula, the light outside began to pulse in rhythm with Lyra's slowing heartbeat, an almost imperceptible synchrony that Alaric noticed with both fascination and a growing sense of wonder. It was as if the nebula itself responded to life, to hope, to the fragile persistence of survival. He spoke less now, letting her rest against him, letting the quiet intimacy of their connection carry them forward. The nebula became more than a backdrop. It became a silent witness to a bond forming in the darkness, a testament to the resilience of life, even in the most unforgiving corners of the cosmos. In the stillness, Alaric began to plan. They would need shelter, resources, a way to rebuild some semblance of shelter and normalcy for Lyra. He ran simulations in his mind, calculating trajectories through the nebula that would lead them to habitable planets, or at least stations capable of sustaining life. But more than calculations, he considered the intangible, the need to teach her, to trust, to feel, to heal. This child, small and fragile as she seemed, carried the weight of her entire species on her shoulders, and he would ensure that weight did not crush her. He tightened his hold slightly, feeling the warmth of her body, the steadying rhythm of her pulse against his chest. In the swirling lights of the nebula, amidst the debris of a shattered world, he made a silent vow. He would not fail her. She was the last spark of a civilization lost to the void, and he would be her protector, her guardian, her anchor in a universe that had shown her nothing but cruelty and loss. The stars outside seemed to lean closer, their brilliance reflecting the fragile hope within them both, as Alaric embraced his new, unexpected responsibility with the fierce determination of a soldier who had faced the void and chosen to stand unyielding against it. Days passed as Alaric navigated the nebula, each light-filled corridor presenting a new challenge and a new wonder. Lyra began to respond to the hum of the ship and the rhythms of its engines, her small fingers exploring buttons and panels with curious reverence, though always under Alaric's careful watch. She asked questions, innumerable questions, about the stars, the nebula, and the fragments of her own memories. Alaric answered each one patiently, drawing from human history, interstellar knowledge, and the tales of ancient explorers who had traversed voids far greater than this one. He realized that in teaching her, he was also rediscovering a sense of purpose long buried beneath the scars of combat and the weight of command. Each answer, each explanation became a bridge between their worlds, a merging of human resilience and alien memory. The nebula itself seemed alive in ways that no simulation could have predicted. Streams of charged particles danced around the ship, reacting subtly to their passage, creating bursts of color that painted the walls of the ship with ever-shifting mosaics of light. Lyra would gasp, her wide eyes reflecting the brilliance outside, and Alaric found himself smiling despite the exhaustion. There was a rhythm here, he realized, a pulse that resonated with life itself. He speculated aloud, speaking into the quiet hum of the cabin, that perhaps the nebula contained life forms or energy matrices that could perceive, even interact with, sentient beings passing through it. Lyra nodded thoughtfully, and in that moment, Alaric understood that the child before him was not merely a survivor. She was already learning to perceive the universe in ways that humans had barely begun to imagine. One evening, as the nebula's light shifted from violet to a deep, warm gold, Alaric noticed Lyra staring at a cluster of stars with unusual intensity. Her small hands pressed to the glass as though she could touch the distant suns. "They're calling me," she whispered, her voice tremulous. Alaric felt a chill, both from the words and from the strange sensation that had been growing in the ship for hours. There was indeed something about this region of space, something that responded to life and consciousness. He knelt beside her, placing a steady hand over hers. "Perhaps they are," he said, careful to keep his tone grounded yet open to possibility. "But whatever they are, we'll face them together. You won't be alone." That night, as Lyra finally succumbed to sleep against his chest, Alaric monitored the ship's systems and the unusual energy readings the nebula was emitting. Streams of data flowed across his display, showing patterns that suggested movement, intelligence, and an almost sentient awareness of their presence. Alaric was no stranger to cosmic phenomena, yet he had never encountered anything that felt so personal, so attuned to the life aboard his vessel. It was as if the nebula itself recognized Lyra's existence, her significance, her potential to carry forward the memory of her civilization. The thought sent shivers down his spine, for with recognition came expectation, and with expectation came responsibility. In the days that followed, their journey through the nebula became a ritual of observation, interaction, and learning. Lyra's perception of the energy fields outside began to sharpen. She could predict when certain clusters would flare, when the currents of plasma would shift. Alaric realized that she was attuning herself to the rhythm of the universe in a way humans could not, her mind bridging the organic intuition of her people with the disciplined analytical framework of a soldier's training. Together, they navigated treacherous paths through unstable star clouds, dodging ion storms and gravitational anomalies with a precision that bordered on instinct. Alaric's respect for her grew with every passing moment, not merely as a survivor, but as a prodigy of perception and resilience. It was during one particularly harrowing passage through a dense swirl of metallic particles that the first real test came. The ship's shields flared, struggling to compensate for the density of the material surrounding them. Alaric fought to maintain course, sweat beading along his forehead, while Lyra's hands fluttered across the controls, guided more by intuition than training. "Shift power to the lateral thrusters," Alaric barked, barely able to see through the storm. Lyra reacted instantly, her fingers dancing across the console as if choreographed by the energy itself. The ship tilted, shuddered, and then surged forward with a graceful, almost sentient motion that avoided disaster. Alaric exhaled sharply, turning to Lyra with a mix of awe and relief. You saved us," he said quietly, his voice heavy with both pride and disbelief. Lyra blinked, absorbing the magnitude of what had just occurred. Yet the incident did not frighten her, it emboldened her. "We're connected," she murmured, almost to herself, as her gaze returned to the nebula's heart. "I can feel it, the flow of life, the way it moves around us." Alaric placed a hand on her shoulder, steadying her yet marveling at the child's perceptive acuity. He realized that they were no longer simply traveling through space, they were participating in a dialogue with it, responding to its rhythms and being subtly guided by forces beyond comprehension. The nebula had become a teacher, Lyra its student, and he its guardian, a triumvirate of trust, intuition, and survival. As they emerged from the storm, the nebula's brilliance softened into gentle waves of lavender and gold. Alaric allowed himself a moment to breathe, to appreciate the fragile serenity after the chaos. Lyra, still pressed against him, whispered softly, "We're not lost anymore." The words struck him deeply. Lost? Perhaps they had been at the start, but now, with the child's perceptive mind and the nebula's mysterious guidance, they had found a path, a purpose, one that went beyond mere survival. And in the silent expanse of stars, stretching endlessly in all directions, Alaric allowed himself to hope that this journey, perilous as it was, would lead them not only to safety, but to understanding, connection, and perhaps the faint promise of redemption for both human and alien lives intertwined. The next days passed in a surreal rhythm, one dictated less by clocks or schedules and more by the living pulse of the nebula surrounding their vessel. Alaric could feel it now as he walked the narrow corridors with Lyra, a subtle vibration underfoot and a hum in the air, like the heartbeat of the cosmos itself. Lyra's senses had sharpened even further. She would pause mid-step, ears tilting as if listening to the subtlest variations of energy, or she would extend a small hand toward the window, fingers tracing invisible lines in the shifting clouds outside. "It's like the nebula is talking," she said softly, her eyes wide, reflecting the countless stars beyond the glass. Alaric didn't correct her. He had begun to feel it too, the sense of intelligence, of sentience, in this sprawling, iridescent ocean of light and matter. The challenge now was understanding it. The nebula's energy streams were not hostile, but they were chaotic. Without careful observation and delicate navigation, a single misstep could spell disaster. Alaric relied on Lyra's instincts as much as his own experience. She had begun to anticipate patterns in the energy flow, pointing out the safest passages with uncanny precision. When he hesitated over the readings, unsure whether to shift course, her small hands would tap the console and insist, "This way," and invariably, the path she chose proved correct. The realization hit him repeatedly. This child, barely more than 10, had attuned herself to the universe in ways that seasoned explorers could only dream of. She was no mere human. She was a bridge between the old ways of thought and a new, intuitive understanding of existence itself. One night, as the nebula flared in hues of deep indigo and molten gold, Lyra suddenly stiffened and turned to Alaric. "They're near," she whispered, a hint of urgency in her voice. Alaric's eyes followed hers to the patterns on the main viewport, streams of energy converging, almost like a river narrowing to a whirlpool. The readings were off the charts, not dangerous yet, but undeniably powerful. He reached out, steadying her small shoulder. "We proceed carefully," he murmured. "Remember, it's observing us, yes, but it's not our enemy. Not yet." Lyra nodded, her gaze never leaving the brilliant storm. The nebula seemed to respond to their movements, subtly shifting as if to test their resolve. Alaric adjusted the ship's trajectory, allowing it to glide gently along the edges of swirling plasma clouds. Every maneuver required not only skill, but an intuitive connection to the strange energy fields surrounding them. Lyra called out subtle changes in color and vibration, each observation giving them just enough lead time to avoid minor discharges of plasma that could have shredded the vessel. By the time the calm of early space dawn settled over the hull, Alaric realized they had achieved something extraordinary. They were navigating the living nebula not as intruders, but as participants in its mysterious rhythm. It was in this moment of fragile peace that the first real communication occurred. not through words or gestures, but through sensation, a resonant vibration in the hull, a shift in the color and intensity of the nebula's glow, as if the entity was acknowledging them. Lyra laughed softly, delighted, her small fingers tracing the patterns of light dancing across the glass. "They see us," she said. "They know we're here." Alaric allowed himself a rare smile, a spark of hope in a long-dimmed life. Hope, he realized, had been rekindled by the presence of this remarkable child and the strange, sentient nebula that seemed to recognize her significance. Over the next few rotations, Alaric and Lyra began to experiment with deliberate interactions. Lyra would make subtle gestures, extend her hands, hum a tune, and the nebula would respond, swirling brighter, forming patterns that resembled abstract constellations within the clouds. Alaric noted the similarities to ancient human storytelling, the way civilizations had once traced tales in the night sky. Here, though, it was alive, responsive, aware. Lyra's mind absorbed every nuance, her intuition bridging the gap between her human origin and this cosmic intelligence. And in watching her, Alaric felt a profound shift within himself, a return to purpose that he had believed lost forever. But the nebula was not without peril. The energy that offered wonder also posed threat. Small bursts of gravitational eddies would form without warning, pulling at the hull, shaking the ship as if to test their resilience. Alaric's hands moved with precision across the controls, stabilizing the vessel. But it was Lyra who first sensed the subtle fluctuations, warning him of disturbances he could only detect a moment later. "Left side," she would call, "2 pulses coming." And twice in the past few rotations, her warnings had prevented near catastrophic failures, saving not only the ship, but the fragile life aboard it. As they emerged from another particularly dense cluster of swirling light, Lyra pressed herself against Alaric's side. "We're doing it," she said softly. "We're part of it now." The words struck him deeply. Indeed, they were no longer mere passengers in this cosmic ocean. They were participants, interpreters, and guardians. Alaric's heart swelled with pride and relief. He had rescued her from the darkness of lost memory and shattered worlds, and now, together, they were discovering the boundless potential of human resilience and understanding when combined with the unfathomable intelligence of the universe. And then came the first clear sign that their journey would bring revelation, not just survival. A dense cluster of energy, more vibrant and structured than any they had seen before, appeared on the horizon. It pulsed with a pattern that seemed almost musical, harmonics resonating through the hull. Lyra's eyes widened, pupils dilated with awe. "It's singing," she whispered. Alaric shivered, realizing that the nebula was no longer merely alive. It was conscious, aware, and, in its own enigmatic way, communicating. He looked down at Lyra, whose small face glowed in the reflected nebula light, and knew that whatever lay ahead would challenge them both, reshaping their understanding of existence, of connection, and of the bond that had already grown unbreakable between human and child, human and cosmos. The pulsating cluster loomed before them, a living tapestry of light and energy that seemed to resonate with every molecule of their being. Alaric's hands gripped the controls, though the ship no longer felt like merely metal and circuits. It had become an extension of their consciousness, a conduit between their fragile human minds and the vast, sentient expanse surrounding them. Lyra's small fingers hovered over the console, her gaze fixed on the swirling patterns of color, each hue vibrating with meaning, each pulse a note in the nebula's cosmic symphony. "It's welcoming us," she breathed, her voice barely audible over the hum of the ship. Alaric swallowed hard, the enormity of what they faced pressing down upon him. This was no mere nebula. They were encountering a consciousness older than humanity itself, a living entity whose mind spanned light years and whose understanding of existence defied every principle he had learned as a soldier, an explorer, a survivor. And yet, there was no malice in its energy, no threat, only curiosity, recognition, and a strange, ineffable longing to connect. Lyra extended a hand toward the shifting currents of light outside the viewport, and the nebula responded instantly. Streams of iridescent energy formed delicate arcs that mirrored her gesture, looping around her small fingers as if acknowledging her presence. Alaric felt a lump form in his throat, overwhelmed by the beauty and significance of the moment. He reached over and took her hand gently in his, feeling the warmth and certainty of her grip. Together, they had arrived at a threshold where human intuition, courage, and empathy were no longer separate from the universe. They were woven into its very fabric. Suddenly, a surge of energy pulsed through the ship, lifting it gently as though cradled by invisible hands. The nebula's light intensified, colors blending and swirling into forms that Alaric could only describe as shapes of living thought, vivid, intricate, and impossibly complex. He realized that the nebula was attempting to communicate more than sensation or emotion. It was conveying knowledge, history, and understanding across the void. Lyra's eyes widened as she absorbed the patterns. "It's showing us everything," she whispered. "Its memories, its story." Alaric leaned closer to the console, scanning the data streams and energy fluctuations as best he could. It was beyond calculation or analysis. The information unfolded like a living narrative, revealing civilizations that had risen and fallen, stars that had been born and died in cycles beyond human comprehension, and countless other entities that had once drifted through the cosmos, their consciousnesses now intertwined with this vast sentient nebula. Yet, through all of it, one truth emerged with crystalline clarity. The nebula recognized humanity as a species capable of empathy, of cooperation, of bridging the gap between intelligence and compassion. And in Lyra, it saw the culmination of that potential. Hope manifested in a single, remarkable child. Hours, or perhaps days, passed as they remained in the heart of the nebula, absorbing its lessons and marveling at the endless spectacle of living life. Alaric felt himself changing, not physically, but in ways deeper and more profound. He understood now that survival alone was not the purpose of life. Connection, understanding, and courage, the willingness to reach beyond fear and despair, these were the true measures of existence. Lyra, too, seemed transformed, radiating confidence, curiosity, and a profound sense of belonging that had been absent from her life before their journey began. And then, as suddenly as it had intensified, the nebula shifted, releasing a cascade of light that coalesced into a path, a bridge of pure energy leading toward the unknown reaches of the cosmos. Lyra's eyes sparkled. "It's guiding us," she said, barely containing her excitement. Alaric nodded, pride and awe welling within him. He realized that they were being entrusted not merely with passage, but with a purpose. They were chosen to witness, to learn, and perhaps to carry the wisdom of this sentient nebula back to a universe that had yet to recognize the full potential of life and consciousness. They followed the glowing path, feeling the hum of the nebula resonating with their very bones, guiding them through twisting currents of cosmic light. The experience was more than navigation, it was communion. Alaric and Lyra were no longer separate from the cosmos. They were part of its rhythm, participants in a dance that spanned eternity. Every pulse of the nebula, every shift of color, every vibration that ran through the ship was a message, a reassurance, a gift of knowledge beyond human language. When at last they emerged from the nebula's heart, the universe outside seemed transformed. Stars burned brighter, constellations shimmered with hidden meaning, and the cold void of space no longer felt empty. Alaric glanced at Lyra, whose face radiated wonder and serenity. "We're changed," she murmured. "We'll never be the same." He smiled, a deep, fulfilled smile that spoke of gratitude, of understanding, of hope. They had faced the incomprehensible and emerged not only alive, but enlightened, bonded in ways that transcended fear, distance, and even time itself. As they set a course back toward known space, Alaric allowed himself one final glance at the nebula behind them. Its light lingered in his mind, a reminder that the universe was alive, watching, and capable of recognizing the courage and compassion of even the smallest of beings. Lyra leaned against him, tired but unafraid, and together they began the journey home, carrying with them the profound truth of their encounter, that life, connection, and empathy were forces as powerful as any star, capable of shaping destinies, bridging worlds, and even melting the cold, infinite night of space into a tapestry of wonder and hope. They had entered the nebula as traveler and child. They emerged as witnesses, as participants in a grander story, forever changed. And as the ship glided through the cosmic night, Alaric knew that no matter what awaited them, they would face it together, with courage, compassion, and the unshakable bond that had carried them through the very heart of the universe.